Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond, where 1,000 days ago we started out with a simple goal in mind, and that was building a 5-acre pond to raise some tiger bass. And since then, seasons have come and gone, and it's been an incredible journey with some twists and turns. And even though we met some of those goals that I set on day one, when I look back at those ideas, I realize I had sort of a tunnel vision because most of my focus was on building the pond and the fish that would live in it, but I never realized the impact that the pond would have on the wildlife and the environment around it. So in the beginning, my main focus was on adding structure to the pond and building a good fish habitat and working countless hours to get the right parameters with the water quality and checking dissolved oxygen levels and everything fish related. But I'd say around 6 months into the project, I started noticing an abundance of wildlife showing up at the pond, like eagles, deer, ospreys, waterfowl, raccoons. And after seeing some of these faces show up over and over again, I realized that some of these animals had made this pond their new home. But one of the key turning points for me during this project is when I started to see how comfortable some of these animals were, not just hanging out around the pond, but they were even comfortable hanging out around me, just like some of these white-tailed deer. And in this area, deer are typically very skittish, but out here at the farm, they didn't seem to mind my presence at all, as you can see with all those deer laying down in the background. But one of the reasons that kind of changed my thought process with this 5-acre pond is because with the fish, they didn't have an option. Once I put them in the pond, they're basically forced to live there. But when the bald eagles and deer and ducks showed up, they chose to make this pond their home and even raise families here. So my mindset shifted to building a good habitat for all of the animals out here at the farm and making sure they had plenty of food, good living conditions, and in some cases we even built shelters for them. So I devoted 50% of my efforts to the pond and 50% of the efforts to the farmland, and I was really amazed that when you just turn a camera on, hit the record button, and watching the wildlife in their natural environment, and I learned a lot about new species of animals, but I was also very entertained. A big possum eating on a little picnic table under an umbrella, and sometimes we even had turf wars. This was a battle whenever our favorite 2 owls challenged our favorite 2 ducks, and thankfully the ducks survived that one. So we just kept the cameras rolling, and it seemed like every week a new animal or creature would show up. But I couldn't have been any happier than the day that I saw the first bald eagle drinking out of the pond. Because before we built the pond, this farm was just a big peanut field, and I'm sure that dozens of eagles had flown over it over the years, and never really had a good reason to stop. But once we added tilapia and rainbow trout, we gave them several reasons to stop. And once we saw multiple eagles show up, we decided to build an eagle tower. And it's about 45 feet tall and has a 6x6 base. And it was a little bit tricky getting it in the upright position, but with the right equipment, we got it installed. And we got a big thank you from the eagles, and they immediately started using it, mostly as their fishing tower. And once they realized we had an abundance of rainbow trout in the pond, they wanted to make this area their new home. And as they started collecting nesting materials, we quickly realized the platform could use some improvements. For instance, you can see some of that nesting material was falling through the cracks. And we also didn't have any side panels to keep the wind from blowing the straw and sticks off the platform. So the eagles had used it primarily as a feeding tower. But once I started seeing them bringing up nesting materials, and that the platform wasn't sufficient to build a nest on, I knew that we were going to have to make some improvements. So we had some eagle experts reach out and give us some good advice on how to build a sturdy platform. And then the next goal was to just get a nest started for them. And we did this by weaving some branches in a circular shape. And we knew that if the eagles were going to nest here, they were going to make it their own and shape it the way they wanted to. But our goal was to get something started for them to entice them in. And we even added a few perch posts, as well as an eagle nesting cam. So now let's take a quick look at the eagle tower and see what birds have been stopping by to visit. And this is one of the most frequent visitors, the kingfisher. He's an excellent hunter, uses this as his perch, and he always gets ran off by the bigger birds. This time it's the crows. And if you look closely, one of those crows even has a small fish in his mouth, maybe a little bluegill. I don't think they're very good at plucking them out of the water. That one probably got chased up onto the bank by a bigger fish. And look who decided to show up at night. It's the friendly owl that we call Hooter, and since the bald eagles haven't taken over the nest and started nesting, I am really happy to see the owl stopping by to check it out. And owls are known to be pretty terrible nest builders, so most of the time they just use or occupy an old nest made by a different species. And it didn't take long before we actually had some bald eagles show up and inspect it to see if it was worthy of a nest. So the first couple that showed up were juvenile eagles, and I've heard that some eagles use the same nesting site for life. So it was nice to see some of these young eagles look for what could potentially be their first nesting site. And our only problem with this idea is we were a little too late, as the bald eagles that live at this pond had already built a nest here, But we were excited when we had the first pair of baby bald eagles. And it was also pretty cool knowing that their first meals came from fish right here out of the 5-acre pond. And some of the wildlife that we expected and were happy to see was a variety of wild ducks. We had wood ducks and mallards, diving ducks, and all different types of species. But the first pair to make a permanent home out here were called black-bellied whistling ducks. And they were the first pair of ducks to feel comfortable enough at the pond, and we ended up having 10 baby whistling ducks. So each day we would watch the ducks swim around the pond, and I was a little concerned with all the predators like the eagles and owls. But this family of ducks didn't have any issues, and we were able to watch those babies grow into adults and eventually fly off. But it's always bittersweet whenever they fly back to the pond. I guess they still use it as home even though it's a small portion out of the year. But I can't talk about ducks without mentioning the world's friendliest duck that we called Romeo. Romeo never met a stranger. You can see he would even try to make friends with a cat, a crow, and sometimes when other waterfowl wasn't around, he would simply just hang out with the decoys. And that's why we were a little on edge whenever our two favorite owls that we call Hooter and Al Capone decided that they really didn't like Romeo hanging out in their pond. But no matter how many attempts they made, in the pitch black dark, Romeo was able to dodge each and every one of them. And that's how I know he really liked the pond, because he stayed even though he had to be on high alert 24/7. And it was also really cool to see one of the female ducks that we raised from an egg fly back home one day and become best friends with Romeo. And although they leave every summer, you can always bet they're going to return back home during the winter. And we continued to see new species of birds, a lot of the fish-eating variety, as well as hawks and other predators that would sometimes get fooled by the dove decoys. But this past summer we had a pair of ospreys show up to the Eagle Tower, and this was pretty interesting because even though their nesting season had already passed, the ospreys started improving the nest, which made us think that we may get to see a late season nesting. But this pair worked hard to bring several new sticks up, and they worked hard to build the walls up on the outer parts of the nest. But like we suspected, they had most likely already laid their eggs for that year. But now that the nest is there and in good shape, we have high hopes that the pair of ospreys or eagles are going to be using it to nest in the next couple of months. And one of the other fan favorites that have been here since day one was a fox squirrel that we call Foxy. Each day he would come out and check out our progress with the pond, and he also spent countless hours out in the peanut field collecting those peanuts for the winter. And one day we found out there was actually a family of fox squirrels, and we wanted to feed them and keep them around and also get a little bit closer look at them, so I set up this peanut picnic table. But let's just say that getting the fox squirrels to find the table was a harder job than what I expected. Look at him, he's literally standing right across the road from his table, but he can't seem to find it. So we wanted to provide Foxy a place to live, so we built this squirrel house and mounted it 20 feet high in a big oak tree. We even added a nice lawn and tried to entice him in with some of his favorite nuts. And although Foxy wasn't the first one to show up, we had another squirrel stop by to inspect the house that we called Chip. And at first, Chip was pretty skeptical, but his loss was another's gain when the mouse that we call Gus Gus showed up. And it seemed like each night we would have a new critter show up. This time it was a raccoon. He must have smelled some of the walnuts. And even though we didn't build the house for him, he tried squeezing through the front door and actually made it in. So once Gus Gus saw that he had some competition, he decided to never let that happen again and did his best to pack up every nut he could and store it away for the winter. But up until this point, the two had been using the house, Chip in the daytime, Gus Gus at night. And now we're about to see their first encounter with each other. Chip stopping by on his morning routine and surprised to see Gus Gus laying in there in the bed. But Gus Gus seems to have staked his claim and ran him off. But that was only temporary. Chip comes back with a better plan. That was wild. We got to replay that in slow motion to see exactly what happened. So it starts off with Gus Gus leaping out of the bed at Chip, but the squirrel's reflexes are way faster, and he jumps over the top of Gus Gus. But Gus Gus had more problems than Chip, because one day one of the least expected animals showed up, a cat. But Gus Gus wasn't an ordinary mouse. He had already planned ahead for this exact moment, and had even chewed through a window to give himself an escape route. And after an afternoon of cat and mouse, Gus Gus escaped and still lives in the squirrel house to this day. And over the years, we continued to build and make improvements to the 5-acre pond and the farm, and one of my favorites was the addition of this new pond that we call Cedar Falls. And we started out by raising prawns in this area, but with the help of Aquascape, we turned it into a beautiful 20,000-gallon ecosystem pond full of boulders and trees with a nice cascading waterfall. But my goals for this new pond were different, because with a clear water ecosystem pond, not only can you have all of the same fish species, but you get to add aquatic vegetation, but most importantly, that clear water gives you an up-close look at what goes on beneath the surface of the water. For instance, I'd always heard that tilapia were mouth brooders, and whenever they sensed trouble, they would signal to all of their young to swim inside of their mouth where they could protect them and move them to a safer area. And one day I was able to capture some of this incredible footage, and as those bigger bass closed in on that tilapia, she was able to gather up every single one of those fry and move them into one of those shallow vegetated pockets, and she released them there where they'd be safe. So while this same type of thing happens in the 5-acre pond, the addition of this smaller Clearwater pond was really valuable at teaching us some of the characteristics of these fish. Not to mention we had our first successful bass spawn in here and had some little baby bass fry swimming around. And if you guys recall, the first bass that we ever caught out of the pond was named Tiger, obviously because he's a tiger bass. And we wanted to get a little better look at the characteristics of these tiger bass, so we started him out in a 55-gallon aquarium and quickly got to see some of his aggression, feeding on different things like minnows and worms. And one of the genetic traits of a tiger bass is they also grow really fast. So we moved him into the 300-gallon aquarium, and once he outgrew the aquarium, we put him in Cedar Falls. But that was another one of my goals, to not just raise bass in the 5-acre pond where we couldn't see them, but to also have some in the aquariums in clear water so we could get a good look at them and see just how aggressive those tiger bass were. But we didn't stop with the tiger bass, we also wanted to see some other species. So we got a smallmouth bass out of the Tennessee River, and surprisingly he adapted very well to these warmer climates down south. We also added a spotted bass, and they're also known for their aggression, and this guy did not disappoint. He's extremely aggressive. But this has been one of my favorite side projects out here at the farm. We've got underwater cameras set up where we always get to see some explosive action during feedings. Because after all, hey, who doesn't like to see a bass go airborne chasing his next meal? That's pretty incredible. And over the years it doesn't happen often, but occasionally the water will clear up in the 5-acre pond, just enough so that we can see schooling bass with overhead drone. And the tiger bass are just as aggressive in there, with big appetites. As you can see here, we even captured one of them jumping up in the air to catch a pair of mating dragonflies. That's something you don't see every day. But we continued watching the schooling bass chase bait around the pond, and over the years have determined while it's an effective technique, our belief is that the schooling bass burn more energy making laps around the pond and chasing bait, so it may be kind of counterproductive for them. We watch some of those bigger female bass sit behind a log and eat just 2 or 3 bluegills a day, burning almost zero energy, and they're the ones with the most substantial weight gains. And one key thing that I've learned in the last 1,000 days is the sheer volume of forage food that these tiger bass require. And that's why we began growing and introducing the jumbo freshwater prawn, similar to a crawfish and a shrimp. And this is our 3rd year raising these freshwater prawns, and it's been by far the most productive. Look at the size of some of these colossal shrimp. And as you can see, these jumbo prawns are a huge protein snack for the bass, and a big reason that these bass went from 2 inches long to some of them pushing 7 pounds in less than 3 years. But each year we start out with 5,000 to 7,000 post-larva prawns. They require brackish water to reproduce, but once they reach that post-larva stage, they can survive in 100% fresh water. So if you missed our last video, we're right here at the end of growing season for the prawns. And so I captured some of the bigger males, and I think this was a record year for size and growth, because we had several of those big jumbo size. But I caught 4 that were abnormally large, and rather than moving them into the 5-acre pond, I wanted to do another experiment where we put them in our 300-gallon aquarium, because just like everything else out here, prawns are a pretty interesting species. So hopefully by putting them in here, we'll learn more about them. They breed in brackish water, they're nighttime feeders, and having 4 big males in here, I'm probably going to add some additional hiding spots for them, because I think they get a little territorial. But in the last video, I asked you all to help me name these 4, and Bahina Fam came up with some really good names: Bubba, Forrest, and Lieutenant Dan. And there aren't any more fitting names when it comes to shrimp. So those are the names for the first 3, and we got 1 runt in here. And Jay says name him Scampy. So those are fitting names. We'll name the 2 twins, Forrest and Bubba, the big guy, Lieutenant Dan, and the runt, Scampy. So after about a week of them living in the aquarium, I was a little concerned when I walked over, because when I saw some of these outer shells, I thought that some of them may not have made it, but it turns out that they just molted. As you can see, there's Forrest, Bubba, Lieutenant Dan, and then Scampy back there in the back. So they all survived, maybe just adding them to a different water source. They molted and got rid of their old shell. But man, that looks really neat. Even that bright blue color on those long pinchers stays behind with the shell. And I think this little guy's eating his. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they consume it to help rebuild their next outer shell. And today's video is brought to you by Current, also known as the future of banking. And Current is a banking app with some really nice features like the paycheck advance of up to $750 once you qualify. It can also help you safely build your credit with a charge card, and users have seen an average of an 80-point increase in their credit scores over a period of 6 months. And you can also get paid up to 2 days faster with direct deposit. And members can use their Current cards at over 40,000 ATM locations with no fees, and they also have no fees on overdrafts for up to $200. And when you set up payroll deposits, you can get a boost with a 4% bonus on your savings. And for those of you into crypto, members can buy and sell dozens of crypto coins without any trading fees. So if you need to build your credit score or want to unlock some of these tools like the Paycheck Advance, then head over to current.com/BamaBass and use code BamaBass50, and that code will get you $50. Terms and conditions apply. And we can't talk about the last 1,000 days of this pond project without mentioning the big blizzard we had last year. So for many of you all, snow is common and something you see every winter, but it was a very unique experience for us because it was the first time that any of the animals, fish, or wildlife here on the farm had ever experienced snow. And I was also really interested to see how the ponds held up. But luckily, I think having that waterfall and flowing water is what kept everything thawed out. But like I mentioned, the animals probably had no idea what was happening because they've never seen snow before. And the fish didn't seem to mind at all, still aggressive as always. But even though the conditions were rough, I knew that this may be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here. So I set out cameras and flew the drones and tried to capture every angle and get the full snow experience. And in just a short amount of time, we had a record of 11 inches of snowfall. Ducks that we call Echo and Romeo, they don't mind the cold weather at all. And their duck house behind them's even covered in snow. And now here's a look at the squirrel house cam. The mouse that we call Gus Gus is having a tough time getting through the door with all the accumulation. And we got some more whitetail action down by the creek. There's something majestic about whitetails walking in snow. We got the raccoon coming down out of the tree. And if you watch his paws, you can see him filling out the snow. Not sure what to think about it. And we had a little young buck that was considering crossing the creek. And then he thought a little bit better. I don't blame him. And this is our little kingfisher buddy that's always a regular out here at the pond. He's probably not too happy that the snow is interfering with his hunting. And one of the original members of the Crimson Oak farm, the owl that we call Hooter, flying up on the Eagle Tower and sitting there all the way until sunrise. Not sure what to make of all the snow. Alright, we're out here the next morning and our grand total of snow is 11 inches. So I gotta say, that was one of the highlights last year. But the tiger bass aren't the only ones that require a lot of food. So one of my goals was to make sure we always had plenty of crops to keep all of the wildlife fed. So I planted things like corn and soybeans and sorghum for the deer. But you've seen the big abundance of birds in the area, so we would also plant things like sunflowers to help draw them in. And we wanted to focus on plants that had a lot of seeds. And you can see each sunflower head has an abundance of seeds. And another good one for this area was brown top millet. And we also planted sorghum, which is good for the deer as well. And it didn't take long for those birds to start flocking in. So we did our best to rotate different crops throughout the year to keep some sort of food source around the pond all year long. And I'm always looking for new food sources. So this past week I went to one of our local farms in search of some sweet potatoes. I've always heard that deer like to eat sweet potatoes, so I got the back of my truck loaded up with them. And folks, I hope they like them because that is a lot of sweet potatoes. If they don't like them, this could be a big mistake. So I basically just swept them off the back of the truck in several different piles right here where they typically eat at. And there you go. We got the camera set out. Let's see what the deer think of them. One of the first to show up is one of those new spotted fawns that was just born a couple of weeks ago. Man, he's tiny. You can see the deer sniffing around. The raccoon, I'm not really sure. And he's like, I don't know what to think about this. Hey, but we had a new visitor show up. I guess that sweet smell in there brought Mr. Pup Dog over. He's alerting everybody in the surrounding area, saying, hey guys, we got an unlimited buffet over here. But it didn't take long for them to start eating them, especially once they were already cracked open. That seemed to do the trick. We got the raccoons and the whitetails out here enjoying the potatoes. It definitely looks like it's a little harder for them to chew, but after all, deer eat acorns and corn. They probably don't think it's that bad. And look who it is. We got the possum, Mr. George Jones. And there's some of the twin fawns. So judging based off what I've seen so far, I would say that the sweet potatoes are a success. And probably something else we'll add into our arsenal. The bucks really seem to like it, and I knew the raccoons would like it because they've always got a sweet tooth. And now it's time for one more feeding as we feed these aggressive bass in Cedar Falls. But as I look back over the past 1,000 days, I see how this project has evolved. We started out with tunnel vision, just wanting to successfully build a pond that held water so we could grow some big bass. And then over time it turned into more of a wildlife sanctuary, and we got just as much enjoyment, if not more, from all the wildlife and animals that showed up. So now the question is, what do we do with the next 1,000 days? And with the advancements in technology, one of my new goals is to make this an interactive farm so that you guys can interact and see these animals and fish in real time. So this past week we've set up several live stream cameras that are going to be going live any day now, but we got some special projects that we're working on so that you're not just viewing the animals, you're interacting with them. For instance, we got feeders set up all over the farm, 3 in the 5-acre pond, 1 at Cedar Falls, as well as some wildlife feeders near the woods. And so we're building some control panels with inputs and outputs that are going to allow the streamers in real time to request an action like a feeder going off, and you'll be able to watch the feeder go off, see the underwater views of the fish feeding, or maybe the deer and raccoons eating corn and protein pellets. But it's something I think we can have a lot of fun with, because recently I just saw this viral video where a cow would come up to a camera, and every time it mooed, a feeder would dispense some food. So the cow got trained to come up and moo directly in front of the camera. And there's no telling what could potentially happen when some of these aggressive fish and crazy raccoons figure out that their actions may give them some more food. So that's one of our next goals. It's taking some time to get all the software set up. We're even building some cameras that have attached underwater lighting so that these streams can run 24/7 and you'll be able to watch underwater or even deep in the woods in the pitch black of dark, and hopefully always have some entertaining content on the live feed. But we also always rely on you guys to give us your feedback and tell us those projects that interest you enough to keep coming back and watching the channel. So if you have any other ideas, leave it in a comment down below. Alright, if you missed the last video, we built our own Bama Bass pit tag reader kit, which comes with a pit tag scanner as well as 10 single-use pit tag injectors. So there's a single pit tag located in here as well as a disposable needle. So if you're out in the John boat and just want to tag a few fish in your pond, this is the perfect setup. But each fish we catch, we're going to scan it to read its tag and see how big these crimson oak bass have gotten. There we go. Got him. Putting up a good fight. Yes, sir. Come on in here. Let's get a good look at you. Nice, healthy fish. Alright, this fish has been caught. 570371. Weighing in at 2.60 pounds. Alright, this fish is named the Reaper, and has pretty much made the little feeder his home, as we've caught him right out in front of it 3 times over the past 3 months. Whoa. Whoa. Man, that one hit it like a freight train. Running straight to deep water. Big fish. Oh yeah. This may be that same big one we just caught last week. No, I don't think it's the same big fish. I think it's a different one. Man, that is a beauty. Big female. Alright, this fish has been caught. 570687. Weighing in at 4.12 pounds. Man, what a beauty of a fish. Love seeing them like that. Alright, this fish is named Iceman, and we're seeing some good growth on it. Definitely one of those bass that hangs around the feeder and eats the bluegills. Got him. Down deep. See what size fish we got here. Oh, it feels good. Oh yeah. Big bass hanging out 12 feet deep. Still hot. That's what I'm talking about. Nice one. Alright, this fish has been caught. 571094, weighing in at 2.77 pounds. So this fish is named Bandam, and it's one of those interesting fish that its weight fluctuates a lot. It's like it's moved out deep here recently, and probably just depending on what forage is swimming through that deep water is what's making this bass's weight fluctuate. Here we go, another one down deep. Right at the bank. There we go, finally turned. Smaller fish. Alright, another fish has been caught, 571466, 1.63 pounds. Alright, this fish is named Valkyrie, and it's one of those fish that just leave me scratching my head. So this is one of the original 2-inch bass that we put in, and I'd only caught it one time prior to this, back in 2023, and it weighed less than a pound. So this is a 3-year-old fish, only weighing 1.63 pounds, swimming in the deepest part of the pond. So there are male fish in here that just don't have the genetics to ever get really big. But I'm always very surprised when I catch one of those original 2-inch bass and almost have zero data on it. It's like they're a ghost in here. But in Valkyrie's case, he doesn't eat very much, so not many opportunities to catch him. Got him. There we go. The deep hole is producing today. Little guy. Alright, this little one's been caught. 32303, weighing in at 1.25 pounds. Now this is another very interesting story. So this fish is named Nero, and all the fish on this list that have a red name were removed from the pond back during the survey in the spring. But we put all of those bass in a cage and left them in the pond overnight. And the only way this makes sense is that somehow Nero was able to escape that cage, most likely by jumping and hitting the lid, and only because he was a smaller bass was that even possible. So Nero's another one of those young male bass, but he refused to leave the Crimson Oak Pond. And you gotta respect that, so he's here to stay. So for those of you out there that have been here with us since day one, I can't say thank you enough. You guys are the reason this project got to where it's at today. But if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button and follow along with all the wildlife, aggressive bass, and pond projects out here at the farm. But I hope y'all enjoyed this one, and we will see you all next time.